Hi, you're listening to Scribble Talk, a podcast for bid and proposal professionals. My name is Bhaskar Sundram, and with my co-host Ashley Case, we'll be sitting down with our industry leaders, share their stories, discuss their career, and learn how to make an impact in the industry. Today's guest is Dr. Robert Frey. Dr. Bob delivers tangible business value to every one of his 104 small business, mid-tier, and Fortune 50 federal support services and commercial customers. Among his customers are a major financial institution with more than 150 billion in assets, and a multinational firm with 20 billion in revenues, and a global corporation with customers in more than 75 countries. Dr. Bob is a dynamic and highly productive proposal professional with 35 years plus significant trend-setting accomplishments and thought leaderships, as evidenced by his multiple speaking engagements with APMP and PMI in both US and Canada. His competencies span proposal solution, strategizing, and architecture development, oral presentation, coaching, training, teaching, knowledge management, and support for business planning and capture management, coupled with writing and publications. Dr. Bob also brings broad technical awareness in information technology, engineering, scientific support services, and telecoms. His awards associated with 7.926 billion that Dr. Bob assisted his customers to win multi-year contracts with NASA, Johnson Space Center, Goddard Space Flight Center, Kennedy Space Center, Ames Research Center, Glenn Research Center, US Army, Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps, Department of Homeland Security, and US Coast, and Department of countless other organizations. That's a lot, Dr. Bob. Welcome to Scribble Talk. Great to have you.
Thank you, Bhaskar. I appreciate your introduction. Thank you.
Oh, that's beautiful. Dr. Bob, talk us through where were you born, and let's talk about your early life in high school.
Sure. I was born in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. That's on the east coast of the U.S. And I grew up near Hershey, Pennsylvania, the chocolate town, USA. And on certain days, you could smell the wonderful aroma of chocolate coming from the factory, although it was about 5 miles away from home. But I grew up there. I went to elementary school there. I went to junior high and high school there. And then I pursued my undergraduate in biology at Lebanon Valley College in Annville, Pennsylvania, which is also near Hershey. And following that, I took an educational hiatus because of family. And then I pursued my my first master's, which was in history. And then through University of Maryland, University College, I pursued and achieved my MBA and Master of Science in Management with a focus in marketing. And then directly after those two master's degrees, I pursued and earned my Doctor of Management from the University of Maryland University College in 2009. So my formal education has spanned a number of decades, but family is and obviously one's professional life have to take priority. Now I still continue with education through the Harvard Extension School, most recently taking courses. These are 15-week courses in agile project management and computer science for business professionals, where I actually learned to do coding, which was a steep learning curve for me, but it was fun. I built my first website, and it was very engaging. But I really enjoyed this experience there through Harvard Extension School.
Wow, a boy walking through with chocolates, going up to multiple masters and a PhD, but still learning, continuing your learning. How was it when you were growing up? I'm sure the chocolates would be much more delicious when you were growing up compared to what we are eating now, Dr. Bob. Do you have any favorites?
In terms of memories from growing up, my fondest memories are spending the summers with my mother's parents, my grandmother and grandfather, in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. And there I learned about baseball, about the trains. My grandfather had been a railway mail clerk with the United States Postal Service, and learned about gardening, learned about woodworking, and helping my grandmother with things around the house, such as laundry. In those days, there was no automatic washing machine and dryer and so forth. It was all done with a hand type of machine, and then it was hung out on a clothesline to dry. And I helped her with that process, and I enjoyed doing it. Have fond memories of doing that. But I grew to very much love baseball. At that time, I was a Philadelphia Phillies fan, growing up there in central Pennsylvania. Now here in the Washington, D.C. area, my wife and I are Washington Nationals fans. But I grew very much to enjoy woodworking and gardening as well, and absolutely loved going to see Phillies games in person in Philadelphia with my grandfather. They were some of the fondest memories I have from childhood.
Ah, that's quite nice. When you reflected, even though I wasn't in that area then, I could literally visualize you doing whatever you just said the Dr. Bob. Thank you. And bachelor's in history, progressing to double masters and a PhD in management. Talk us through why you chose those subjects and what made you progress into double masters and also to do a PhD in management.
I need to back up a little bit. My undergraduate was in biology.
Oh, really?
Yes. And so I had, and I was, at that point in my life, I was very much interested in pursuing a graduate degree in forestry or plant ecology, plant physiology. But so I took a lot of courses in biology, in chemistry, in physics, in calculus, and so forth. And I would not trade the laboratory experience that I had through biology, chemistry, physics for anything. I find that having that bench laboratory experience is so meaningful to me in interacting with professionals across a broad spectrum of disciplines, that it gives me a foundation on which to interview subject matter experts across across a wide range of disciplines. And then my master's in history was driven by my interest in Holocaust studies. And I ultimately wrote my first book, was focused on Holocaust studies. And then following my experience in business, I wanted to pursue the MBA and Master of Science in Management with a focus in marketing, and then just logically wanted to pursue my doctorate in management. Now, I was very grateful that distance learning came to be, because being, working full time with a family, being able to dedicate the number of hours on campus under a traditional curriculum, that would not have been possible for me. So mine was a hybrid type of learning environment where there were certain times I was on campus in College Park, Maryland, and other times the interaction was virtual. So I really liked that hybrid learning. In fact, I'm still good friends with some of the members of my cohort at the doctoral level. And I also liked very much that the cohorts were small. It wasn't, we were just talking, my wife and I were just talking to a young woman who's an undergraduate at Virginia Tech. And one of her classes had 500 students, whereas the cohort was about 18 or so at Maryland. So it was a much more focused and intimate type of learning environment.
That's amazing, Dr. Bob. I mean, like when you said you were very interested in gardening early on as a childhood memory, moving to biology, and from biology to history, Holocaust studies, even publishing a book. From then on, marketing, I mean, like all different subjects. I mean, like what interests you, Dr. Bob? I mean, like before you study, I mean, like, is it just a curiosity that's like, I want to know about this? Even now, learning coding, creating your own website. Talk us through what's behind. I mean, like, what's the nudge that takes you to this, I will be this lifelong learner?
Well, that's exactly right, Bhaskar. The lifelong learning is something that's very important to me. I continue, for example, on a regular basis to do a lot of nonfiction reading. But I like the structured learning environment, even though it may be totally online or face-to-face or a hybrid. I really enjoy the structure, and I also enjoy teaching, and I do a lot of proposal-related training to folks who are brand new to proposal development, as well as those individuals who've experienced a lot of proposal work in their careers. So but what I've gotten in terms of feedback is that what you've taught us is such a great reminder of things that we need to keep in mind on a daily basis. And what I have found very much is that through teaching, I continue to learn, because one of the things that I've found is that people learn in very different ways. When I do face-to-face teaching, I have a lot of show and tell things, tangible items that I give away as gifts to people, but it's also used in the teaching. Some people are more textual or narrative focused in terms of how they learn. Others are more graphically focused, visually focused. But in teaching, I've learned to approach a given topic from multiple directions in order to assist people to learn. And as I said, in the process of teaching, I also learn a tremendous amount about what is effective in terms of teaching and how people learn and how people need to or I need to meet people where they are in terms of how they learn and how they're being open to learn. I had an experience last October out in Las Vegas, Nevada, where I was invited to go out and conduct training for a group of 50 people from a company based in West Virginia. Now they have staff all over the country, and so they met in Las Vegas for a team building period and as well as learning. And so I had folks in that classroom, which was a huge room, probably ranging in age from 25 to 70. And to keep that group of people fully engaged for an entire afternoon was incredibly demanding, but it was very gratifying, and they were extremely eager to learn. I did a lot of hands-on exercises with them. Now, with a group that large, that presents a lot of challenges because just in terms of the space in the room. But I had devised a number of interactive sessions, and people just had an amazing time and were very competitive with each other, which and that's one of the things, back to your original question about what drives me from the standpoint of education, continuing education. It's certainly a degree of competitiveness. I like matching ideas with people and approaches, and I find that learning in a structured and graded environment, as opposed to, say, an auditing environment, which it sounds like that'd be interesting, but that's not for me. I would rather compete with, and particularly at Harvard, for example, there were people from all over the world. There were people from Europe, Australia, all over the U.S. and but I like sharing ideas and seeing how my ideas align with or diverge from fellow students.
Nice, Dr. Bob, amazing. So while you studied, you also had a career, and a very successful career, close to $10 billion worth of success across different things. And that didn't stop you from positioning yourself as a technical expert. And one end, you are learning all the sectors that you're operating. On the other end, you're also learning, taking different roles across different organizations. Talk us through, where did you start in your career all the way to this 100+ customers of yours?
Well, I began my proposal development career in 1986. And at the time, I was a technical writer supporting Goddard Space Flight Center, NASA Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland, as a technical writer and editor. And that was under contract with a federal support services contractor. The company pursued a $90+ million proposal effort with NASA Goddard, and the person whom they had selected from outside the company to come in and lead the effort did not work out. And so the vice president of the company, he was looking for resources. Now, at that time, I didn't know anything about proposal. at all. The process, the language, the roles and responsibilities and so forth. But I volunteered to go over to McLean, Virginia. At the time we were living in Columbia, Maryland. And so I volunteered to go over to McLean and work with the vice president and his team. My learning curve was just straight up. But what I enjoyed so much about it was being in the breach, being in time-constrained situations, and obviously every proposal has time constraints, but I didn't know that at the time. I also enjoyed the interaction with very smart people, and also enjoyed editing the narrative for the proposal, and helped to produce the proposal, physically produce the hard copy volumes. At that time, it was all hard copy. And so when that experience concluded, the same vice president there in McLean, a man by the name of Moffat Tharp, who unfortunately just died this past year, but he was an incredibly important, albeit demanding, mentor to me. What happened was he began a group called the Strategic Planning and Business Development Group in the fall of 1987. And so I petitioned him to join his organization, and he ultimately accepted. He gave me absolutely free rein to build a department which did not exist. So I spent a lot of time, energy, and effort doing trade studies insofar as computer hardware and software, and insofar as processes. We had no staff at that point. And so I hired everyone. I had to present my findings and recommendations to him. He was the type of individual who said, go as far and as fast as you can. I'll give you a mid-course correction if you need it. He did not want weekly memos. He did not want daily updates. That was not the way he worked. He said, look, I don't know how to do it. You go figure it out. Which, after that was a very different way of working for me, where it was totally open road. But I learned how to do it, and ultimately came to value that experience very highly. Although I have to say, there were times that I was very challenged by him. But obviously that's what makes people grow, or helps people grow. And following that experience, I served in that role for 2 years, and then moved back closer to home in Columbia, Maryland, in Howard County, Maryland, and worked for a company that provided scientific support services to NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, as well as to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. And so I was director of proposal development for that organization. Came to build friendships with people there, friendships still maintained to this day. I really like working with well-educated, very articulate, and very outgoing people. Now it's kind of interesting because I think of myself more as an introvert, although I think most people when they interact with me, say, no, you're very extroverted, particularly when I teach. But I'm actually more introverted than extroverted, and that's what the Myers-Briggs test suggests as well. But in any event, I really enjoy working with that caliber of person, and ultimately I was with several other companies, and then was working with an organization in Hunt Valley, Maryland, that's still in existence. It's called EA Engineering, Science and Technology. They're an environmental company. And while I was working there, I was introduced to a man by the name of Ron Trowbridge, who is still active as an entrepreneur in a different company, but he's a serial entrepreneur, certainly. And he was very interested in me coming to McLean, Virginia, to lead the proposal development activity in a company that was a minority-owned small business, 8A at that time. And I elected to do that. And that was the best experience I've ever had working for an organization full-time. We had a sustained win percentage of 67% over 9 years. Now, that was not measured in terms of X proposals submitted, Y proposals won. That's how many companies do win percentage. This was done in terms of X dollars pursued, Y dollars won. And now that 67%, people have said to me, oh, that just can't be right. Well, when the company went through due diligence ultimately for sale to Wiley Labs, there were all sorts of attorneys and accountants and financial attorneys who certainly only dealt in fact. And so that number had to be validated 6 ways from Sunday, and it was. And also the fact that when I first joined, the company had 15.5 million in revenues. When I left the company to form my own consultancy, we had 364 million in revenues, and that was through organic growth. That was not through acquisition, merger, purchasing contracts, and so forth. We had 140 people when I first joined, and when I left, we had 1,965. Now, can you tell I wrote that a lot? But one of the things, I had one person in my group when I first started there, and that was a proposal manager. We never grew to have a large staff. We had about 9 total people in the proposal development group, but we were highly productive. One of the things that I introduced to the company was applying knowledge management to proposal development. And so I set up an entire process, both the process, the tools, the knowledge championship, gaining executive level engagement. And it was highly successful in what I call rapid proposal prototyping, meaning that by having documented what the company did technically, as well as from a past performance standpoint, as well as all of its industry awards and government recognition and so forth, we were able to develop a first draft of a proposal very quickly. and we're able to do more proposals per unit time. And so I have always been a huge proponent and practitioner of knowledge management as being a critical success factor in proposal development success. In fact, my title at the company was ultimately Senior Vice President of Knowledge Management and Proposal Development. Notice which one came first. And that's the way that I petitioned that it be. We had a absolutely amazing run of wins. And one of the things the company did that was so valuable and so supportive of winning was for every proposal that was a win, the company organized and convened a proposal win party. Now that wasn't just pizza. That was taking people out to a nice place and first and foremost recognizing the contributions of each individual who contributed to the proposal win. And those contributions were conveyed by the executives of the company. And then everyone who contributed received a certificate and a check. And it was amazing how invigorating the environment was to work in with that kind of incentive. Now, it had to be a proposal win. It couldn't, just working hard on a proposal didn't produce anything other than thanks for doing that, but we didn't win. But it was an incredibly valuable approach. And what I have found over the years in interacting with so many different organizations, that many organizations don't have any sort of proposal win bonus program. What we did in this company was my supervisor, Ron Trowbridge, he set up a 3-tiered process where tier 1 were the individuals who contributed significantly, did a lot of the heavy lifting, put in a lot of additional time on nights and weekends and holidays, all the way down to a tier 3. And so the level of the check varied in accordance with the level of the contribution. But it was, the company made a big deal about people's contributions to winning. And that was so important in igniting that level of interest company-wide, not just people at corporate headquarters, but throughout the company. And they were recognized. Another thing the company did was to not bring people in from billable work to work on proposals. So many times companies will bring in staff from being on site at a government customer's location and sequester them in a war room for a week. So that doesn't keep the government customer happy, particularly if it's a recompete. So what I learned to do and what I taught my staff how to do was to conduct very targeted interviews of the subject matter experts. And that saved so much billable time. They were the operational staff who were on the ground supporting the government customers were able to stay focused supporting them and not zeroing in on proposal writing. Plus, so many times operations folks, technical subject matter experts don't like to write, and they're not necessarily expert at it. So I found that it's better to interview those folks and then write it for their evaluation than it is to have them to respond to a data call or to try to write something that they're not comfortable doing. Plus, many times technical subject matter experts don't know how to write from a proposaling standpoint, from a how do we sell our capabilities in a way that the government's going to resonate with. And so doing that kind of interviewing is something that I'm a huge proponent of and practitioner of, to this day, I still do interviews with subject matter experts and then write either technical or management sections or past performance sections, that type of thing.
I think it's not easy to talk 38 plus years of career in like not even 38 minutes, but like 3.5 minutes. Dr. Bob, but thank you for sharing. I mean, like, that's amazing. I mean, from where you started as a technical writer, progressing all the way into senior vice president of knowledge management, and then going on and supporting these 100-odd companies in their success, like 7.9 to 6 billion. It's unbelievable. So at what point in your proposal career did you come across APMP as an industry body?
Oh, that was back in 1990. I joined APMP in 1990, and I was very active in the National Capital Area Conference. I'm now part of the Chesapeake Conference or chapter. Then in 1996, one of my colleagues nominated me to become an APMP fellow, and I was awarded the fellowship in New Orleans in 1996. But since that time, I continued to, well, as long as the APMP journal was still published, I was a frequent contributor and reviewer of articles and book reviews that came in. I have, as you mentioned at the outset, I have conducted many training webinars and seminars for APMP chapters nationwide, as well as in the Maple Leaf chapter in Canada, going to Toronto to deliver webinars. And I've also done training through the Project Management Institute, because proposals meet the definition of a project. You know, they are time bound, they're cost bound, and so I see a tremendous synergy between PMI and APMP. And in fact, in my training that I do for proposal development, I frequently draw the connections between the APMP approaches as well as the PMBOK approaches, because, well, as an example, the project management body of knowledge, particularly the 6th edition, not so much the 7th, but the 6th edition has a framework that involves inputs, tools and techniques, and outputs. And so I've done a lot of writing and teaching in that regard, where you can look at business development from the standpoint of its inputs, the tools and techniques that it uses, and what are the outputs, and what do the outputs feed? What's the next step? You know, and that of course relates to capture management. And then capture management, the outputs of capture management feed proposal development. So the synergy there is something that I've done a lot of teaching and writing about.
Thank you, Dr. Wise. I think we talked a lot about, I'm sure we missed a lot more in your professional career, but I think that's enough. There's much more to Dr. Bob than just the proposal development or his academic studies. Dr. Bob, talk us through 3 things not many people not know about you.
Well, I mentioned one of them already, and that is that I am more of an introvert than an extrovert. Although that's not the way I come across in group settings or in training settings. Certainly not everyone knows my 2 hobbies, one of them being photography, particularly photography from aboard a helicopter. I really enjoy doing that. Most recently did that with our son out on Kauai in Hawaii, And on that particular helicopter, they had the doors off to assist with the photography. Now, that's something that it took me about 5 minutes to get used to with that headwind, but it was amazing. But I also do photography of sporting events. I'm talking about like hockey, basketball, football, baseball. But my second hobby is that of woodworking. And most recently, I've been focused on doing wood turning on my lathe at home. So I make chalices, candle stands, lidded cups. I like working with exotic hardwoods that are much more challenging than, say, maple or walnut in the US or cherry. But I like working with what are called exotic hardwoods that are extremely dense, and you really need sharp chisels to work in those woods. But another thing that most people wouldn't know about me, and but I would say that my mother's mother, my grandmother, was the most influential person in my life, even though I only knew her 14 years. She was an amazing person, the most loving individual I've ever met, and she was so patient and was an outstanding teacher. But most of all, she was patient. To allow me to try things, and as was my grandfather. When he allowed me to use his workshop, that's how I learned to do woodworking. It was what he did was, at the time, lettuce in a grocery store came in wooden crates, and he would get them from the grocery store, take out the nails, cut them down, and that was my wood for the woodworking projects. But I learned how to drive a nail straight or to put a screw in without splitting out the wood and that type of thing. So it was giving me latitude to explore. And so I found both of those individuals incredibly valuable to me. And most of the people with whom I interact today would have never met my grandparents, so that they wouldn't know.
Heli photography. I think people might have fear of heights, even to go in helicopters, just to look from that, what we call the helicopter view, as we call it in all the studies these days. But how was it? When did it all begin, Dr. Bob? I mean, like, when was the first? Do you remember your very first helicopter photo? And where did it happen? Any memory around that?
Oh, absolutely. First time I went up in a helicopter was over the Gettysburg, Pennsylvania battlefield. And that goes back years and years. And I remember the pilot taking off, and the cockpit pointed down towards the earth, and then it swept up. And the pilot and I shared a seatbelt. Now, the first time I didn't have a camera on board for that flight, but the first time that I did was in San Francisco, and what an amazing experience. And then both my wife and I and one of our sons and I have done helicopter rides, and I've done them in San Francisco, San Diego, Hawaii, Las Vegas, the Grand Canyon, and done some of those more than once. But what I particularly enjoy is the amazing vistas that become available to one's eye when you're at 3,000 or 4,000 feet. For example, in San Diego, we flew over Petco Park, the baseball stadium, and then one of our sons and I had gone there this past summer for one of our father-son vacations, and we're sitting in Petco Park. So we had flown over it, and we also sat in it. And of course, with photography at altitude, there are techniques that you have to apply that don't apply at ground level, in terms of which lenses to use, what settings to use, and that type of thing, because everything is changing so quickly. The lighting is changing. The winds don't necessarily impact photography, but certainly the lighting does. And all it takes is, okay, we're in the sun, we're out of the sun. We're in the sun, we're out of the sun. And so that drives, what it means is that I have to take a tremendous number of images in order to get ones that I'm happy with.
That's nice. I think these days you can see drones going up.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I have no
the
interest in doing drone photography. I know some people who do, and they're good at it, but that's not what I'd rather be there.
Yeah, totally. I think that's amazing. I mean, like, that's like 2,000 plus professional commercial photographs that you've taken, and many of them, or pretty much all of them, have been sold. It looks like there is, people can be, I've heard people being multi-talented, Dr. Bob, but you are one of the unique who I've met in person. And it's true. I mean, like, from where you started, learning continues, and on the other end, passions like woodworks, gardening, and also helicopter photography. What a versatile person you are. So early on, you touched about a book that you wrote on Holocaust.
Yes.
Talk us through the story behind it, and any other books that you've contributed, or any other that's in the play, Dr. Rob.
Sure. Well, from a business perspective, I have authored and had published 6 editions of the book Successful Proposal Strategies for Small Businesses. The last edition of that came out in 2012. What I'm working on now is a new version of that book, not a new edition, because the U.S. Library of Congress requires a new edition to be at least 30% new or revised material. And so I'm not going in that direction. What I am doing is building what I see as a series of vignettes from the real world, where and they're accompanied with my own photographs that relate to the topic or how I present the topic. And so this is going to be called Successful Proposal Strategies on the Go. So it's not so much a didactic type of work as my previous proposal books were. They were more of a reference volume. This is much more something that anyone in the proposal world could pick up and dive into at whatever point they want, and the vignettes are 1,000 words or less. So they, it's not cumbersome reading, and not a lot of time obligation. But that will be published by the same publisher, Artec House, which is based in Boston and London. I'm working with the folks in London, and that should be coming out in the latter part of 2023. And the great thing about it is that, first of all, it's all updated from 2012, because there's been a lot of things that have changed since 2012. Also, in terms of how I think about proposal development. But I also very much like that it is vignette focused. It's conversational, as opposed to a textbook. That it's more of a dialogue than it is a didactic, a teaching type of tool. But I've also written and had published a book on the trial and lynching of Leo Frank, who was the only Jew to have ever been lynched in the United States. That was in 1915 in Georgia. And I turned my doctoral dissertation into a book that was published in Europe, and that was focused on how small business entrepreneurs allocate resources to which particular area of the business. For example, what I was interested in exploring was if an entrepreneur has experience in, say, business development, are they going to choose to invest resources into additional business developers, or are they going to choose to invest in like contracts administrators or human resources people and that type of thing? Because the owners of the small business with whom I worked for 9 years that did that meteoric growth, they were focused on business development, and that's where they put a lot of their resources. And they were also huge supporters of the business development function. So that was the motivation for why I did my dissertation on what I did. And I also presented that as an academic paper in Nashville, Tennessee, through the United States Association of Small Business Enterprises, USASP. That was shortly after I had completed my dissertation. So I've done a lot of writing of articles over the years. I'm talking about business related articles. I've had them published in refereed journals in both the United States and in Canada. And I would say that across time, I've probably had 50 different articles that have been published. Some of them in academic journals, some of them in business type journals like the Kansas City Small Business Monthly, for example, or there was a magazine that used to exist called Corporate Corridors that published a lot of my articles. But I really enjoy the writing part of it because that goes to teaching. And so it all connects.
Thanks, Doc. But that's amazing. I mean, like 50 plus technical articles plus a lot of books that too in varied arenas. But again, if you want, I can drop by. I'm 15 minutes away from your publisher. I can drop by to just ask, are you going to publish early for your new proposal book? If there is anything I can do to help, let me know.
Okay.
Otherwise, Dr. Bob, thank you for that. And I think we few random questions, Dr. Bob, just to get the
Sure.
other side, and then we'll get into the people in your life, and then 1 or 2 questions about it. Another 10, 15 minutes, Dr. Bob, if that's
okay.
So officially, let enter the Nutters round in honor of Howard Nutt, or we call the random rapid fire question round. No right or wrong answer. Whatever comes in your mind, just go for it.
Okay.
So are you a morning person or are you a night person, Dr. Bob?
Well, for original writing and for graphics conceptualization, morning, early.
If you could eat only 3 food for the rest of your life, which 3 food would you choose?
Oh, swordfish.
A swordfish. Nice.
Salmon.
Uh-huh.
and corn on the cob.
If you're allowed to take a person from history to the next helicopter photo shoot, who would you take you with you to the next photo shoot?
I would more than likely take George Washington.
Nice.
With him having been a surveyor, I'm sure he could add value to what I was seeing from altitude far more than I could, because I'm not saying he surveyed the whole country. Of course he didn't, but he was a surveyor by trade, and plus I have always found his contributions and achievements under some very challenging circumstances. I would like to sit next to him.
And what questions would you ask him? Mostly about surveying, or go more about?
No, I would ask him about his experiences in the French and Indian War, when he was supporting the British against the French and certain Native American tribes in areas that, for example, what are now Pittsburgh. But I am very interested in that period in history, where with very few resources and training and discipline and so forth, George Washington and his troops and the British were able to achieve some pretty miraculous outcomes.
So what's the most interesting place that you have been to?
I would say the Amalfi Coast of Italy. My wife and I took a cooking, we went to cooking school there it was about a week, and it was open only to Americans and Canadians.
Ooh.
And there were only like 5 people in the class, including us. But we learned how to make pasta from scratch, from flour, an egg, and water, and a fork. But it was just so beautiful there along the coast south of Naples. And probably second would be I would say Rome. I would go to Rome every month.
Nice. What's the best compliment you have received, and from whom?
I received a note through LinkedIn from an individual whom I had in a training seminar out in Seattle, Washington, about 18 years ago. And he still remembered my training seminar, and he told me how much he valued what I had communicated and what positive impact it had on him and his business. And, I haven't seen or interacted with this man in 18 years. And that was very, very gratifying.
That's so beautiful.
In fact, I get a number of those kinds of notes, whether it's email or through LinkedIn, that how important my proposal book has been to people, or how much they remember. One of the things that I use in my proposal training is a peanut butter and jelly making exercise. And it has to do with understanding and approach. And I can remember just recently, there was a woman very senior in her craft who said, "I still remember your peanut butter and jelly training." That was here in Virginia, but that goes back more than 12 years. But it literally stuck with her.
Nice. Peanut butter and jelly. Next time, Dr. Bob, we'll invite you to talk about your peanut butter jelly. That sounds amazing. So that little boy who was walking with smelling chocolates when he was going to school. What do you think that 10-year-old boy would tell you now, looking back into your life?
What he would tell me. Okay. I would suspect that he would say something along the lines of keep thinking of yourself as being a youth, someone who is 10. Chronological age really is just an artificial construct. So keeping open to learn. There's a lot of people I encounter in business who will say something along the lines of, oh, we know how to do this. We don't need additional guidance or whatever. And it's like, okay, but to keep what and this is not my original terminology, but to keep what's called beginner's mind, to keep, even though you have a lot of experience in doing something, be open to learning from any source. And I don't mean just human source, but just for example, through photography, I learned things. Through woodworking, I learned things. Through travel, I learned things. And just being open to, hey, I might have to change my view a bit or totally, but being open to doing that, and not like, okay, well, I have X years of experience and therefore now I got it all. No, you don't. No, you don't.
What a powerful advice. Thank you, Dr. Bob. Dr. Bob, who are the people who have been the most influential in your life and careers?
Well, certainly in my life, as I mentioned, my mother's mother and father, my grandparents, the late Moffat Tharp, whom I mentioned, Ron Trowbridge, with whom I'm still very good friends. In fact, we just had lunch about 6 weeks ago, and he's now the chairman of the board of another small company. My wife Terry is incredibly important to me. She has been and continues to be extremely supportive. She understands the demands of the proposal world, and she's a professional in and of herself. She's in the mortgage banking industry, and she's a very, very competent professional in that regard. But she is extremely supportive of what I do, and she was very a bit concerned when I decided to launch my own consultancy because there's no safety net, and but she's been there every step of the way, and we've been working together in the business. She's not the face to industry, I am, but she supports the back office, and but she'll read certain things that I'm presenting and give me her feedback. I'm not talking about every email or something like that. I'm talking about, critical documents, and she's a great listener.
Yes, so much blessings in your life, Dr. Bob, and I wish all the more blessings comes to you.
Thank you.
Dr. Bob, I think, even though it might feel like, okay, it looks like it's an easy learning path for Dr. Bob, but only you know the obstacles that you have to break through to become who you are today and still continue to learn. Talk us through some of those obstacles and how you kind of worked your way broke that and made it as a positive contribution to your life?
Well, before I had written the first edition of my proposal book, as I mentioned, I didn't have any proposal knowledge. I had no knowledge of the federal government, U.S. federal government acquisition process. I had no knowledge of the lexicon or terminology associated with it. I had no idea about who did what and, you know, what roles that they were taking and so forth. So one of the things that I did was at every chance, I documented what I was learning in real time. And it took about 6 years of gathering experiences and information, examples and so forth, for me to put together the first draft of the first edition of my book. Now, because I was working through a traditional publisher, I reached out to 32 different publishing houses before Artec House accepted my manuscript tentatively. It had to still go through a detailed technical review and edit. And I distinctly remember, and I really liked working with the technical editor. In fact, I did co-teaching with him at UCLA 1 year. At any rate, this technical editor circled one of my footnotes and said, "Bob, great idea. Now turn this into a chapter." And it's like, what? That was a challenge. It was also a challenge to maintain one's sense of hey, this is still possible when I was doing all this outreach. Now, you can't submit a book manuscript to multiple book publishers. Same way with academic journal articles. You can't submit them to like 14 journals at one time. They don't allow it. So it's serially, you know, one after the other. And so it was a good year of revision and edits, and before the manuscript was accepted. And then, as I said, being a traditional publisher, at that time it was still done on printing presses, and it was hardbound and so forth, and still is. But I've had the opportunity to go up to Norwood, Massachusetts, near Boston, and actually meet with the people with whom I've worked, and I'm still working with folks there all the way from 1996, and now some of them have retired and so forth. But getting the book accepted was a huge hurdle, and a lot of stick-to-itiveness had to be applied in order to get through all the rejections, because a lot of times the manuscript was just sent back saying, this doesn't fit our editorial needs, or this isn't on our editorial calendar for the next year, so no, we're not interested. So it's it's a challenge, but it goes back to something my grandfather taught me. And this relates to baseball. He said, you can't hit them if you don't swing. And that's very true. I mean, yeah, you can say, I'm not trying anymore, but the only way to get a hit is to swing the bat. And so that's what I keep doing.
Wow, what an end, Dr. Bob. Thank you for that. Dr. Bob, superb life so far, a lot of learnings, continuing to learn, but at the same time, you have given a lot to the people around you as well. What's next for you, Dr. Bob? What are you looking forward to in the immediate future?
Well, I'm very much looking forward to the release of the new book, and I have a great desire to focus more exclusively on oral presentation coaching. I really enjoy that process. I've done video oral presentation coaching where the government wants to get an MP4 file as the submission. And so it's working with the videographers, the sound people, as well as the technical subject matter experts to produce a video production. But that's an area that I would very much like to focus more tightly on. And I've also been, in fact, next week I'll be interviewing with a multi-billion-dollar company to see how I can help them identify strengths in their proposals, because the U.S. federal government focuses on strengths, weaknesses, and deficiencies. Now, most U.S. companies focus on win themes, discriminators, things like that, which the U.S. federal government doesn't consider. So I'm going to be talking to senior leadership in this organization to see how they may engage with me to be what they call a strengths assessor, where, okay, these are the elements that you, company, think are exemplary in your proposal, but let me take a look at them and say, do I really think the Air Force, or do I really think NASA, or do I really think Department of Energy is going to see them in the same way? And so I would very much like to refine the areas that I'm focused on into those two primary pathways.
Definitely. All the very best for the Dr. Bob. I'm sure it will fall in place for you. Is there any part of your life or career, or is there anything else you would like to share to the listeners, Dr. Bob, before we close this episode?
Yes, there is. Thank you. I also wanted to share the critical importance that I find and have drawn from our children. One of our children is now a master sergeant in the United States Army, and he's been in for 15 years. He's done 3 tours of duty in the Middle East, and I find him to be an incredible motivator to me. I don't know how he and other young men and women did the kinds of things they had to do. And so I find that to be incredibly motivating to me. And I very much learn from him and am inspired by him. And it's something that I absolutely cherish, the inspiration that I receive from him.
Totally. I think that's amazing. I mean, like, where do you stop learning, Dr. Bob? It's a beautiful family, amazing wife, grandparents, and then your lifelong passion of learning from very early on to the biology, which is fascinating in its own, moving on to history, writing a book, and from there into marketing, then to management, then to proposal management, then to do a lot more wonders in this, even publishing books, to then helicopter picture carving. I think if people can be good at one thing, I think they call themselves the expert, but this is unbelievable, Dr. Bob. I feel bad, but it has taken me close to 180 episodes to make this happen, to find you, but all good things needs to wait, and I'm glad that I found you. Glad to share.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. I very much appreciate you and your hospitality.
Thank you, Dr. Bob. Wish you, your family, all the good health and happiness. Continue to inspire us. Happy New Year. And
Happy New Year.
Very soon, Dr. Bob. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
To our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. Please visit batchyscribble.com/podcast to listen to this episode and check out any of our other previously recorded episodes. If you've enjoyed today's interview, don't forget to subscribe, review, and share the Scribble Talk podcast. We hope you'll check out our next episode where we interview another industry expert and special guest. Until then, it's Ashley Kays,
Bhaskar Sundaram,
signing off.